and welcome to this Cambridge Festival 2021 event hosted at the Museum of Classical Archaeology. We had hoped that we would be able to welcome you all to our cast gallery to enjoy some poetry today, but sadly it wasn't to be. So instead, we are embarking on a voyage of discovery into the ancient past from our own homes. And it is my great pleasure to have with me here today the poets Josephine Balmer and Lesley Saunders. We're going to hear them give us some readings of their poems, and then together we will dive a little bit deeper into their process and their relationship to the ancient world. Josephine Balmer is a British poet, translator of classics, and a literary critic. She has published translations of both Sappho and Catullus, as well as volumes of her own work. Both her poetry and her translations have been nominated for awards, and in 2017, her collection Paths of Survival was nominated for the London Hellenic Prize. Lesley Saunders is a poet and an educationalist. She works across multiple languages, both ancient and modern, and has recently finished a translation of works by Portuguese poet and feminist activist Maria Teresa Horta. Her collection Nomini Domini, published in 2018, has been described as an inventive and hugely convincing paean to an abiding relationship with the classics. And so now I'm going to hand over and let our poets speak instead.
Hello to you all. It's a huge pleasure to be participating in this year's Cambridge Festival, and it's particularly thrilling to be reading alongside my fellow poet, Lesley Saunders. As poets and classicists, Lesley and I have both been concerned with excavating the connections between classical literature and contemporary poetry for many years, and we will both be exploring these issues further with you all tonight. Now, we probably think of classical literature as a series of epic canonical texts, but recently, in my newly completed collection, Ghost Passage, I have been interested more in lower art rather than high art, more in writing that stands outside the usual preconceptions of literature. Fragmentary inscriptions, graffitied household objects, medical potions, even spells scratched on pewter amulets, as well as a cache of everyday Roman writing tablets recently excavated in the City of London. And the first poem I'm going to read tonight is based on one of these tablets, excavated during the rebuilding of the Bloomberg headquarters in Walbrook, London. It's a rather fragmentary inscription, which reads simply, "For Attius the thief at Durebrevi, or Rochester." It could be the start of a legal document, or maybe a curse tablet, or perhaps it's a tease, an in-joke between friends, maybe even, as in my poem, between a pair of lovers. Thief. Writing tablet, Walbrook, London, 69 CE. For Attius the thief at Rochester. I knew it the first day I saw him. A chill November morning, the sun sharpening the room we'd stumbled back to the night before. His small bed at one end, a shelf for cracked Samian, worn chair piled with clothes. The way he peeled the stiff tunic from my body, murmuring my name as if it was his to take, a sacred enchantment, a curse, as if he'd always believed I'd come, a client in his debt, Marcus, Marcus. Yes, I knew it, all was over, lost. Outside, the world spun, emperors changed by the hour, our governors fled. Now time was a breath suspended between the dawn cries of foreign traders and rhythmic chants of recalled soldiers, falling away as the day scuttled to its end. On the roof, the tiles hissed with rain, while we made love over and over again. Then, one morning, he said he was leaving. Out in the market, it was trying to snow. Our sanctuary, too, had ice in the air. He talked of Rochester, a new legion. Rochester. The name was like poison. I lay in bed all day, trying to read alone, Ovid, Catullus, the passions of Myrmidons. My love, remember the nights we shared. I saw his eyes flecked with fiery topaz, inhaled the scent of his hop-soaked skin. Through the walls, someone coughed or shuffled across the creaky floor above. I read on. The city was empty, a husk. Attius, you thief, come back to London. Return it to me, the heart you have stolen. And now I think Lesley is going to take us from the world of ancient love into the brutal world of ancient warfare.
Thank you, Josephine. As Suzanne said, we were hoping to do this for you from the beautiful cast gallery in the Faculty of Classics in Cambridge. But as that wasn't to be, instead, we want to thank Suzanne Turner and Justina Ladoche for all the help and support you've given us in making this broadcast possible. I'm going to read a few poems from my latest collection called Nomine Domine. It's a collection which is about the past in two senses. First, the past of the ancient world in terms of its literature and its kind of public face, if you like. And the other kind of past is my own personal past from all those days, so long ago, when I was learning Latin and Greek as a schoolgirl. The problem, I guess, with both kinds of past is that they are fragmentary and elusive, and so recreating them creates a sort of a risk of being misremembered or falsified, or perhaps of becoming nostalgia for a golden age that never really was. I was struck by something that Dr. Edmund Richardson, a classical scholar, said recently about classical scholarship, that it is driven by this desire that can never be fulfilled. 97% of ancient literature is lost. We work with fragments, he says. We work with dreams. We work with a longing for lost text to be discovered, for every broken thing to be repaired. And that sense of loss and longing has been explored, of course, by many modern poets, extraordinary writers like Ivan Boland, Anne Carson, Tony Harrison, Seamus Heaney, Ted Hughes, Michael Longley, Alice Oswald, and of course, Josephine Balmer. I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing a virtual stage with Josephine. I first encountered her work so long ago in the 1980s. Her beautiful and lucid translations of Sappho absolutely captivated me. But we're going to come back to Sappho in a little while. As Josephine said, I'm starting with warfare. And this is a poem I wrote when I was working a few years ago in Kosovo, that tragic and war-torn country. And it started me thinking about how certain ancient events and images keep resurfacing in our modern lives. The poem has an epigraph taken from Virgil's epic poem, the Aeneid. It's when Aeneas is fleeing the burning city of Troy, and he says to his elderly, frail father, "I will take you myself on my shoulders, and the task will not weigh heavy on me." So this is Asylum. The young women here are headscarved and majestic, and they drive like fury along the city's unmade roads. Do they, in the marrow of their quick bones, remember how one night they were hoisted on their father's shoulders, and the blanket that was flung over their sleepy dark heads like another dusk? How not so long ago, A man ran and ran through the ruinous flames, and on his back his own father, still clasping the household gods to his shrunken chest, in case one day there would be a home again to put them in. Not a burnt-out truck or fenced-in camp on the edge of town, but honey cakes and thick coffee, the evening star to steer by. Virgil is so resonant for us still. And this is a poem, another one, that links the sack of Troy to more recent events in a different city, Paris, and the murderous attack at the Bataclan concert hall in November 5.5 years ago. The attack on Troy's inhabitants is described by Virgil in the Aeneid in poignant and chilling detail. And I've laced his beautiful Latin words through the text. I'm not going to translate the Latin, but instead invite you to hear it as a kind of verbal music. Sack. Cafe culture, street life, quis claudem ilius noctis, a woman in her 20s wearing a fur-collared coat, quis funera fando explicet, had been drinking in a bar close by, aut possit lacrimis aequare labores. It was a concert where the music was loud, plurima perque via sternuntur. A girl was carried by a young man in his arms, inertia passim corpora. She appeared to be dead, crudelis ubique luctus, ubique pavor. People were panicked, wounded, screaming. Blood was running all over them. Et plurima mortis imago. They were all so young. Coroibus, Ripeus, Hippanes, Dimas, Panthus. I was on the ground with a man on top of me and another one beside me up against the wall. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Urbs antiqua ruit. It seemed like an eternity.
Thank you, Lesley. I'm going to stay with the abused women of the ancient world. And like my first poem, this one is also based on a writing tablet excavated from the Bloomberg site in Walbrook, London. And to me, it's one of the saddest pieces of classical writing I've ever come across. It seems to have been a letter from one Rufus, a businessman, to his steward at his house in London, ordering the liquidizing of his assets. Heartbreakingly, this includes one of his young women slaves, who is to be sold for as much coin as possible. Now, the tablet doesn't really tell us anything much about this young woman at all, but I imagined her far from home, maybe from the eastern kingdom of Scythia, renowned for its warrior women, the basis for the mythical Amazons. I think, too, the word coin also made me ponder its other use in English, about language, about being apart from, even forgetting your mother tongue. So all of this became incorporated into my poem. Coinage. Writing tablet, Walbrook, London, 95 CE. From Rufus to Apillicus, the steward at my London house. Write the list. See that you work through it carefully. Ensure you cash in the due value of that girl and sell her as directed. Make hard coin out of soft flesh. These days, I don't remember Scythia, a shadow shrinking in some far hushed room. In London, I'm part of the inventory. Rufus, my trader, is busy with his lists. Acquired himself, he craves acquisition. I watch the hands of his new auditors as they move like lovers on abacus and tally, caressing stone currency. At the docks, I search out fresh-landed ships whose crews might share my face. I follow them upstream, enthralled by language, a coinage to chime in blood and then, maybe, on lips. By the shore, I step in sodden footprints, as if that speech might ooze up from the silt. To Rufus, I'm spare change, mere leverage. Here, I know, I will broker my own voice.
That was such a moving poem, Josephine. I'm going to change the mood a little bit because I want to read a poem which is about my fascination as obviously a rather strange teenage girl with the grammar of ancient languages. All those tables of declensions and conjugations, I thought they were so exciting. So the poem conceals some of the grammatical terms in the text, almost like the Celtic guerrillas hiding themselves away from the Roman invaders and making little sorties against the enemy. And it's called Mood. This was advanced study, had me secretly leafing to the end of the primer for the quiet nobility of supines, the weatherproof postures of locatives, voices in the road, the straight street that runs out to the provinces, rain-pocked sea always beyond, infinite. An uptorn whinbush, a scuff of chalk in the turf are indicative. The army skidding round, hooves stammering on stone. Imperative to get the advantage, scouts grubbing in the grass for particles of knowledge, nothing in themselves, but huge with meaning in the right place. Like this votive offering, a springtime scene, not hard to parse, this optative with its gaping throat and caved-in skull, face down in a fen, wishful thinking made brute fact.
Thank you, Lesley. That's lovely. My next poem is also concerned with literacy and language. Again, it's based on a Bloomberg writing tablet, which is inscribed simply with the Roman alphabet and might have been used for teaching British children Roman letters. The tablet is very early, dating to around 61 to 62 CE, which is just after London's destruction during the revolt of Boudicca. So this gave me the starting point for my poem, evoking images of rebuilding a city after a very disastrous war. This resonated, especially as I was working on the poem after watching news reports on children in Syria desperate to return to school. New Roman, writing tablet, Walbrook, London, 61 CE. ABC, DEFG, HIKL, MNO, PQ, RST. In a charred shack, we learn our lessons. Through the smoke, I can smell sorrel, ramsons, blackthorn blossom drifting across like ash, as the shouts of soldiers shatter our hush, and wagons of the dead still roll on past. We do not want this world, the old language, destruction, put to fire, revolt, flight, death. Our task is to etch a new alphabet, new letters, new tools to rebuild our homes, gardens for us children, games to play, schools. We'll smooth the jagged edge of dialect and salve its gaping wounds in majuscule. A, B, C, the scorched march of New Roman, turning blackened wood into cold white stone.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, how the smallest of objects has the power to evoke such feelings and thoughts within us. And my next poem was partly inspired by an object which is now in the British Museum, but also by a passage from Homer's Iliad, the extraordinary moment when Hector, as the Trojan prince who's about to go out into battle against the Greeks, comes to say goodbye to his wife Andromache and his little son Astyanax. He holds out his arms to the child for an embrace, but Astyanax is so terrified by the sight of his father in full armor and with this enormous horsehair crest on top of his helmet that he bursts out crying. And so the hero and his wife have a little moment. They smile, and Hector takes off his helmet so that he can kiss his son. The helmet in my poem is actually that extraordinary piece that was discovered at Sutton Hoo. It's an Anglo-Saxon helmet. But I think you'll see how they connect in this poem, which I wrote for my grandson when he was 1 year old. Helmet. Its eyes are empty, but the brows are wingspans eagling over the low skies of the helmet's gaze, where tomorrow's battlefield sprawls. No wonder the child is terrified. The bronze rings out, a thick male voice sounding through the mask. Wotan, Jehovah, Ogun. This is not the father you love, the one with gifting hands and the look of blue daylight all round him. But if the cap fits, you will learn this new language, how grave and gold it tastes, inlaid with garnets and sagas, sunburnt, sumptuous with works and days. You will see with its eyes how gallantly the world is made.
Thank you, Lesley. And my next poem is also about an object. It's inspired by the recent discovery, not of a writing tablet, but a tiny Roman writing stylus excavated in the City of London. Now, it's very unusual and rather special because each of its 4 sides is inscribed with a minuscule inscription, a message which appears to be the ancient equivalent of, "I went to Rome and all I got you was this lousy pen." When writing the poem, the voice that came to me was that of the gift giver, a young woman with her own reasons to feel shortchanged. Keepsake, inscribed writing stylus, Walbrook, London, 75 CE. From Rome, a keepsake to bring you pleasure, a pointed gift so you will always remember. I wish I could have given you much, much more, but the journey is long and funds are short. I'm sure he threw it in the stream. London, I'd heard, was in ferment, packed with pleasure. Fine wines, sweet ale, and most of all, women. Its frost-edged dusk, a lure to warm the bones. My message, sharpened, in miniature, would go unread, unmarked. He didn't know there was a further present still to come. From that brief jasmine night he'd forgotten, those paired hours we shared before he'd embarked. But I relived my day. How the moon grazed the sea at Ostia like a polished blade, as each serrated kiss cut time in half. A keepsake to bring you pleasure, 10 days old. Her father in replica, as sharp.
How vividly you evoke that imagined past, Josephine. And I think it's our capacity to find a way of empathizing with a life and a world that we can't be part of, that makes writing about ancient times so compulsive in a way. So these are two poems about the beautiful wall frescoes that were found in Pompeii during the excavations. And for me, there's a terrible poignancy about how leisured and stylish life seemed to be for the wealthy people before the city was struck by the eruption of Vesuvius, right up until minutes before that happened. So that's the first of the two poems. And the second poem imagines a veteran soldier alone in his luxury villa in Pompeii, haunted by his past and thinking of commissioning a new wall painting as a sort of distraction. Nightingale with Rose. Deep in the afternoon, the sky turns to gold leaf. Feel now how easy it is to live in the flesh, like wildflowers in a vase of river who spawn their vivid greens and mauves as if they were only beginnings, hedge nests of fledglings on the brink of becoming song. Your boys are out netting fish in the brook. A neighbour is stooping inspectorally over his vines. The ash cloud is still only a glint in the eye of the mountain. You know if you look what you will see. Such a glut of foxglove, kingfisher, marigold. It could tear the heart out of you. Getting up from your ledger, you'll step outside for a moment to breathe the careless evening air. It's citrus, wood smoke, everything you'll ever want. Wallflowers. You wash your hands too often, you can't sleep. You bang and bang on the glass to be let out, to be let in. Life's becoming dull and hard, rage and guilt and dread, all the old undead slouching there with you at table, drinking your health in vinegar, Caesar's veteran alone with the view of the painted jays. The months are long, hot, cloudless, so little shade on the endless limestone road with its kill blossoming in ditches. You're stifled. The mind is the scene of crimes. You need a tabula rasa, fresh start. Tear up the cypresses, pomegranate, that kitsch asphodel. Then these to fill your eyes, morning glory, dog rose, plum, papaver somniferum.
Thank you for those beautiful poems, Lesley, transporting us to Pompeii. And my next poem returns us to London again, and it concerns one of my favourite discoveries from the Roman city. It's a small pewter strip inscribed with Greek, which was discovered on the old Roman foreshore of the Thames in 1989. And originally it would have been rolled up and worn around the neck in an amulet case as a phylactery or a magic charm. And it belonged, we learn from its inscription, to one Demetrius. Now, intriguingly, among strange magical words and a string of complex adjectives and incantations, the text contains lines of hexameter Greek verse, which were already known to us. The writer Lucian records that they were written by a charlatan Black Sea mystic, one Alexander of Abonoticus, during the Antonine Plague of 165 to 170 CE, in which millions died across the empire. So here we have a demotic poetry seeping into ordinary lives, if in extraordinary times, something I think we can all identify with at present. And although I wrote my poem before the present pandemic, clearly it now holds a forceful resonance for us all now. God help Demetrius. Pewter amulet, Upper Thames Street, London, 169 CE. Friendly gods, divinity, Whirl away all heart-pounding, ear-shrieking, breath-piercing, air-carrying plague. Spare us its men-destroying, skin-penetrating, spirit-weighting, flesh-devouring, bone-dissolving, vein-hollowing pain. God help Demetrius. When the watch turned him over, he was rashed, mottled with sores. The same plague and fifth corpse we'd seen that day, each clutching amulets for protection. Their Greek was chalked on doors to stem pestilence with prayer, gibberish, the pus-filled promise of charlatans' charms. And yet those same houses reeked most of death, as if enchantments inflamed infection. Demetrius fed our pits. His talisman we tipped in the Thames. Maybe it cost him, but that pewter was not worth salvaging, for fear of fresh taint, contamination. All hearts stopped as he twitched. We'd been disarmed, and we'd been wrong. Poetry might save one.
Well, Latin remained the lingua franca of Europe right through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. There was a very interesting churchman and teacher and poet called Alcuin of York, who lived in England during the 8th century. And he was a poet in Latin. And he wrote a poem about the loss of his pet nightingale. Such a touching little poem. And perhaps it's an allegory for the loss of faith, or perhaps even the loss of love. Interestingly, there was a notion current at the time that birdsong, the same as poetry, needed to be interpreted, and that it held deep significance if you could only kind of crack the code. And so the poem starts with a little epigraph from one of the troubadours, Guillaume de Poitiers, and it goes in translation, "And the birds sing, each one to another in their own Latin." So this is Alcuin's nightingale. Clad in its bird robes, a small soul perches in the night tree, waiting to enter. The windows of the senses can be slow to open. Evening has stolen another day, and soon the concert halls fill with shadows. Under her basque and fishnet, the jazz singer is a muscle of music. Her solar plexus, a membrane between worlds, wold and sky, thunder and lilacs. The bird in her throat rhymes sweetness with sorrow. And at his desk, a poet weeps because he has no Latin, the words for love song, lifelong, loss.
That's so poignant, Lesley. My next two poems are again voiced by women protagonists from Rome and London. Now, the first is based on a tombstone for a teenage boy found in Moorgate in 1911 and now on display in the Museum of London. And you can still see on it the traces of red paint with which the lettering would have been coloured. The marble itself is of excellent quality, but it's a very small slab, and the name of the boy's mother, Eucarpia, is crammed in much smaller letters on the final line, as if the engraver had run out of space. And in my poem, that stonemason becomes the narrator who tells us the story. The Most Devoted. Inscription, Moorgate, London, 170 CE. Her Latin was imperfect. They were Greeks, but she insisted on the word just so. All else, bar their given names, was in brief, and I complied. Fil pientissimo, the most devoted son, picked out in red. She had chosen Our standard compact square, if imported stone, the most expensive, as her squeezed signature, Eucarpia, scraped the end like a shriveled codicil. Still, she wanted to total his full sum, years 15, months 6, for those he'd had rather than those he'd miss, that half time, half life to which she clung. Feel piantissimo, most devoted son. My next poem here is another fascinating find, also now in the Museum of London. It's an oculist or eye doctor's stamp, engraved backwards on 4 sides so that a medical description could be impressed the right way round along its edges. What's interesting here is that the oculist's name, Tetricus, is Gallic. He's from Gaul, but the lines contain mutated forms of rare Greek words. This gives the potions a sort of faux scientific tone as Tetricus boasts to his customers of the efficacy of his wares. And as in Keepsake, I was thinking not so much about Tetricus the oculist, but of those customers, the consumers of his product. And almost immediately a story came to mind, the age-old story of a love gone wrong, of a marriage and its betrayal. And as I say, it's voiced once again by a woman. Cure-all, oculist stamps, Upper Thames Street, London 120 CE. Tetricus is scented draughts for eyelids, made by hand from fine, fragrant Eurydes. Tetricus is cure-all, mix from Dionysus, medicinal mesi, for scars of the eye, cicatrix. Tetricus is double use, dual purpose by prosopum, for an attack or sudden onset of blurred vision. Tetricus is famed remedy for this distress, a rheum, and failing eyesight, bleariness. Once we'd smiled at his Gallic Greek, Grallic you'd called it, Eurydes or cloying draught, Dionysus, which meant a bitter taste, and double use by prosopum, two-faced, a salve that came in drops or ointment stick, with double the disgust we used to love. Today, I watch you creep to the river, passing on nostrums like an infection, to whichever girl you have installed there. A sudden attack of blurred vision, and your wife of 12 years, invisible. Bitter taste, two-faced, a so-called cure-all. I count my coins. I need a remedy to make you see better, make you see me.
Gosh, Jo, I just so admire the way that you weave such meticulous scholarship into such feelingful poetry. And so, if I may, I'm going to read a couple of extracts from an extended poem about Sappho as a kind of tribute to you, Jo, and how I first encountered your work, as I said before, through the translations that you made of Sappho. My poem imagines Sappho, who of course lived with her group of women friends on the Aegean island of Lesbos, imagines her instead as an old woman in the present time, leaving her home and sailing far to the west to arrive at the Irish island of Inishbofin. It's off the southwest coast of Ireland. And she's actually come there to die. So this is Sappho on Inishbofin, and I'm going to read extracts 1 and 9. Sappho goes west. Her eyelashes are wet with spray. The breeze takes her breath. Her speech brims with absence. The stars have faded. My voice deserts me. I sleep alone. It's dawn, and she's sailing into her own shadow. The citrus groves and heat, the cicada-loud nights of as far ago now as childhood. The water slops and heaves. Quitting her father's house, she's crossed 7 seas to catch this glimpse of Inishbofin, Isle of the White Cow, its great trembling body afloat in a blaze of gold, its craggy head lifting, garlanded in haze, half there. Sappho and the Hag of Beer. The Hag of Beer was a legendary Irish wise woman. Sappho's bones are aching. Oof, she feels as old as time, crabby. She's been sitting for hours, one of those slow August evenings, on a folding chair among the lettuces, a shroud of carpet round her shoulders, staring sightlessly at the wild swans and the rain-soaked light. She coughs and spits into a used tissue, shrinks inside her leathers, an old bog body, all wantonness gone. I am older than the old woman of beer. She turns her face to the low sun and the place where the wild rose hips will come.
Oh, that's a really beautiful and innovative tribute to Sappho, Lesley. Thank you for that. And to conclude our reading, I'm going to evoke the spirit of another famous ancient poet. This final poem is based on another writing tablet from the Bloomberg Dig, and it's one of my favourites of the entire cache. It's actually an address which reads just simply, "Give this to Junius the Cooper, or barrel maker, opposite the house of Catullus." Now this makes Catullus one of the earliest recorded householders in London. But as a classicist, my ears pricked up immediately at his name, for it also happens to be the name of one of the most famous of all Roman poets, Gaius Valerius Catullus, who'd lived around a century earlier. Interestingly, this earlier poet Catullus also mentions Britain, if fleetingly and scathingly, in his verse. And so I sort of imagined that our Catullus from the writing tablet could be a descendant of the earlier poet with similar creative ambitions, although, as we'll see, they might have been rather less successfully achieved than those of his ancestor. The house opposite. Writing tablet, Walbrook, London, 80 CE. Give this note to the Cooper Junius, just opposite the house of Catullus. I unpack my treasures of Syrian glass, plates sourced from the slopes of Vesuvius. The walls I paint with frail shoots of grass, and a poppy, my own hidden message for those who know the poet, my namesake. A flower fallen at the meadow's edge. I had pictured myself as a pioneer, composing dark, difficult northern poems, as fated one day as my famed forebear. Besides, I'd been priced out of Rome. Yet each word I write, I later delete. I watch the starlings rising up at dusk above the teeming cloud fog streets, like a simile slipping out of grasp. I hear the drunken Rhenish equites chant their alehouse verse, swilled in vomit, our bleak reward for 7 months' back pay. My voice is clogged with London clay. All I am here is the house opposite the Cooper, 2 doors down from the brewer. The only lines that come in error, and for them. Barrels, bills, more calls for beer.